How's it going? This is Luke Stokes and Dan, otherwise known as They Call Me Dan from the Hive blockchain. Really excited to get this opportunity to chat a bit. We were discussing this over the, I guess, last week or two, trying to get this call together. And I super appreciate everything that you've done for the Hive community, everything that you've been involved in, this, which now become a battle and a war. And I love the way that you've framed it and the way that you've dove in with your not only your resources, but your time, your attention, and your focus. And I just super appreciate it. Dan, thank you for coming on and having a conversation. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for reaching out. Thanks for having me on. And likewise, I really leapfrog off a lot of the content you make. And you were really pivotal there on Twitter to get a lot of big names. I remember Vitalik was the first really domino in all of this, retweeted you.
That blew me away. Yeah. It was, you ever have those moments like as a content creator, like you have those moments where you just wake up and you're like, I don't care whatever else I have going on right now. I need to do this right now. And that's what I felt when I checked my nodes and I saw what was going on and I was like, holy moly, literally he just did this. I can't believe this. I went and recorded a video and I put it out there and I was just like, the Steem chain just got hacked. And it just blew my mind that CoinDesk and Vitalik and others, yeah, it was amazing.
The video heard around the crypto world. It was really well put together, and it was I don't know, it really set the tone for all of this. It's pretty crazy how it unfolded.
That was a fun moment. It's neat and I don't really consider myself much of definitely not an artist. My sister's an amazing artist, but not much of I've done content, but I don't focus on that entirely. But it was one of those moments where it felt like creation, right? It felt like something just coming out of like, it just was already there and I got to see it kind of materialize. And I've heard artists and stuff talk about their paintings and their sculptures that way, where you just do what you know you're supposed to do in the right moment, and then something happens and people respond to it emotionally. And I think that was kind of what has happened through this whole thing. So we probably don't need to go into all the details of everything. You've done an amazing write-up on Hacker Noon. We'll certainly put those in the notes of the video. I've done a full kind of tweet by tweet, bite-sized little type of perspectives from my personal perspective. There's a post on that. So we'll link to those. Essentially, most people probably watching this will be up to speed. But just to give a brief summary, essentially, the Steem network, which both you and I have invested lots of time and resources. In my case, I got on June of 2016. I remember I had two friends in the crypto space that know me well and were like, man, check out the Steem thing. You're gonna love it. And I was camping with my family. I remember it entirely. And I signed up on my phone, while camping. Oh, this is the coolest thing. And then my first, it wasn't until July that actually was end of June. And it was in July when I posted something on kind of like Independence, July 4th, right? And then my second post was on nonviolent communication. And I got a $30 upvote by Dan Larimer. And I was just like, holy moly, what is this $30 for posting a blog? I've been blogging for over a decade. Nobody noticed or cared. Like, this is amazing. And so my story on Steem was just being super excited about people actually using the blockchain and actually using it for something that was real, blogging and stuff, being in this space since 2013. I hadn't seen much everyday use. My company, Foxcart, trying to get people to use cryptocurrency, just too confusing, too frustrating. Everyday people weren't using it in their checkouts for their shopping carts. And so I was a little discouraged, but seeing Steem come along, I was like, holy moly, this is so amazing. And, I started getting involved back then. I to this day, it was my worst financial investment. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that as an investor. I think I put in like 9 Bitcoin when it was like $3 or $4. And I was just so convinced it was going to $10. It was so obvious, right? Of course, this is going to $10.
Yeah.
And then of course it crashed and I down to like 7 cents. And, and I eventually, a lot of people in the community started bugging me again and again to say, hey, why don't you run a witness node? We like your content. You're a trustworthy voice in the community. We want you to represent the community on a higher level as a witness to actually validate blocks. And I'm like, I'm a programmer. I got a background in computer science engineering. I don't like managing servers, right? But then the more I listened, the more I thought about it. I was like, all right, I'll step up to do this. Kind of on a whim, threw it out there, and then I started getting a bunch of votes, and eventually actually got into the consensus, which was pretty amazing. I was very honored by that, and I've continued to off and on be in consensus since then. So that's kind of my story. I'd love to hear more about your story and kind of your perspective as an investor. Why Steem? Why are you involved?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I was an ex-poker player, and that's sort of my background. That's where I got involved with cryptocurrency, moving Bitcoin to a poker site. And it started to, bubble up. I was like, this is pretty cool. So I have this wallet and I own it. So I'm sort of like a bank, and like, there's no middleman. You're sending me this, and it was instant. And then I send it to the poker. So everything started to click. And So I was a writer on Quora. Actually became top writer there. I have no, I don't even know how to write in cursive. I'm definitely not like a book guy, but I put my mind to it, and it was about my weight loss journey. So then I made my YouTube video and my YouTube channel, and that was more of, I wanted to document my crypto journey. But the whole time, the reason I left Quora was because of the censorship. Like, they were really, blocking telling me what I could and couldn't do, and they're collapsing answers and not getting back to me. So I was like, this is silly. And so I was really liking the concept of Bitcoin, sort of like that censorship-free highway if you need to move value across the planet. And I was thinking, we really need this for social media. And at the same time, I found Steem. I started getting into it. I started reposting some old Quora answers, coming up with some original content. Got a big upvote, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is more than I've made on Quora, in my first week on Steem, or Steemit at the time. And I really didn't click, right? Because I'm not somebody who gets it right away. I didn't get Bitcoin right away. I didn't get Steem right away. It took a real long, like waves hitting the shore before it finally clicked. And I did drop about 120K when it was about $4. I think I got about 30,000 Steem at the time, because I felt
So I'm not that much of an idiot, right? You're telling me that I'm not that much of an idiot, because I was just like, this is inevitably going to be amazing. Like, how does the world not see this, right? Yeah.
I mean, I definitely felt the same way, and I felt compelled to get skin in the game. I felt like I really needed to. That's sort of if I'm on the fence with something and I'm there long enough, I'm saying, okay, let me get skin in the game, and that's really going to paint it black and white. So I get my skin in the game. I quit my YouTube channel because I wake up one day and Alex Jones was banned. I'm not saying I'm pro or against Alex Jones. I'm pro free speech.
Yeah.
And I usually freestyle my videos. So I got up that morning. I was like, well, I guess I'm quitting YouTube. And I didn't think that the day prior. So I said, I make my video. I quit. I joined the DTube. I started going out to all decentralized networks. And that's when I really started getting heavy into Steem. Again, I pulled the trigger at $1, bought 1 million Steem at $1. Thought it was a really good time. And I have an investment philosophy once I get really serious, because investment's sort of like, it's like getting in a kitchen when it's really hot. You have to know what you can withstand. So it's like, I'm committed to Steem. So if this thing goes to 50 cents, I'm doubling down. If this thing goes to 25 cents, I'm doubling down, or I'm selling. If I'm not able to double down and I have the liquid, that means it's not a good investment. If it goes down in half, I shouldn't buy it. Yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful philosophy. And I think I want to pause there just for a second and talk about it. I don't consider myself a great investor, but I've listened to a bunch of great investors. And that is one thing I hear consistently is you detach emotion from it. And what you just described to me as an ex-professional poker player, you get this. I play a little bit of poker. We got to play a game in Bangkok together. I think I made it to the final table, but I did all right, but I didn't do that great. But it was just the idea that, if something makes sense, if the probabilities involved and everything else involved, and this is a good investment, and none of the variables change between when you made the decision back then and when you're making the decision today, it's the exact same decision with the exact same information, then why wouldn't you continue an investment? And I can remember the idea. I mean, it relates to hiring and firing. If you run a business, it relates to your investments and different things. It's like if you wouldn't buy it again today, or you wouldn't hire that person again today, then you should sell it or you should fire them. And it's just a really clear way to look at it. And it's I think very few people can do that. And also I think very few people can buy 1 million Steem at $1 either, right? There's also this aspect of your risk surface. If you're just trying to get by, then your emotional connection, you're lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, your emotional connection to that decision is going to be much higher, because you're like, oh man, where am I going to pay my bills this week, this month, if I make a bad decision, right? And so I think that's a really cool thing to highlight, is that you looked at this very strategically and said, well, the information that I had when I made the decision here hasn't changed to here. Maybe we could double down. I don't know. That's really exciting.
Yeah. And I mean, you said it right. You have to separate emotion. It becomes very black and white. If there's any kind of gray area in your investment, you really should stomp that out. It has to be very clear, convicted, because the arrows come flinging. And we've seen recently, doesn't matter if you're in the stock market, doesn't matter where you are. If you're in fiat, yeah, US dollar may be rising in power now, but would you really want all of your wealth in US dollar for the next 5 years? Gold's always been pretty stable, but we saw that take a hit. It's up a little bit today, but it becomes a where's Waldo? Where do you put your money? It's very that gets into deep philosophy of value, which I like to get into. But it's like,
Oh, heck yeah. I love
where
that topic.
it's like, where is the value? Like, I guess you could say real estate, but then it's very interesting. So getting back on the topic, Steem started going down, so I started every time, because I had a goal at one time. I remember when I was like, okay, I made up my decision. I want to get 1 million Steem. And that was what I set out. And now, I'm way beyond that because it kept going down. I kept doubling up. So yeah, I mean, it's like wrangling a wild animal. You're gonna get some cuts. You're not gonna time it right, but if you wrangle the animal, you get it. You're gonna bring it home. You're gonna be able to cook it. You're gonna be able to have something good out of it. And that's how I feel. It's like we're in the wrangling process. And if you quit during the wrangling process, you're gonna go hungry. So it's like,
Yeah, and you still get cut, right? You still got beat up trying to wrangle it. You just didn't get the meal at the end, right?
Yes. So timing bottoms, even if you're way off, if you really feel where it's going, obviously not financial advice, and I'm willing to lose what I put in, then you have something magical. Then you can really stick with it, double down, invest in your investments, which is very important in my opinion.
I like how you said that. Invest in your investments. And I think that relates to the time and attention, the community engagement, and that's one of the things that I feel, and I love your perspective on this, as we've been talking about DPoS and governance. It's the idea that a social component of delegated proof of stake is really important, because I've seen this for 2 years as a block producer on EOS with EOS DAC. I've seen this in EOS DAC itself, as we have elected custodians. We have a large group of our custodian board who are not showing up, and we don't even speak the same language as a lot of Korean investors in this particular case, where it's just challenging because within EOS DAC, we're like, there's a multi-sig, you have to sign it so the developers can move the code forward to launch the DAC factory, which brings in revenue for the DAC, and there's just this major disconnect. And just the idea of when you're investing time in your investment, when you're committed and you have that kind of social component to the governance side of DPoS and any kind of decision-making like that with people that are invested with skin in the game, man, it's just a really great way to put it.
Yeah, and DPoS takes a lot of hits. I hold DPoS way and above beyond any other blockchain. I like proof of work. I love the concept of proof of work. Where do you get updates from, right? Because everything has an attack surface. Same thing with Ethereum proof of stake. I'm not in love with proof of stake, but it has the exact same problem as proof of work. Where do you get the updates from? Delegated proof of stake, whether people want to remove the human element out of governments, which I think is silly. We're all humans. We have flaws. We have to embrace that. You can't try to make a perfect system, or you get shut out and then you get gatekeepers. So I feel as long as you have elected gatekeepers, and as we saw, right, whether you agreed with what happened during the hostile takeover, witnesses that didn't have the best interest of the majority of the stakeholders, they got removed. And that's the agility of delegated proof of stake. It shows you that it's like, if you fuck up, excuse my French, the next day, you can lose your spot in consensus. And you can't really say that about anything else. So I've really been a fan of delegated.
It works well when there is a nice token distribution. And that's another key piece. And I love that your article pointed out that there was more voting. A lot of the people that have been sitting on the sidelines. I had a conversation with a pretty large whale that they've been, and this is the only other conversation I could think of, and it's someone I know from Puerto Rico connected to this group. So it was like, but they purposely kept their tokens distributed in a bunch of different accounts. So no one has seen them as a big influence on the platform, but they are. And so it's really interesting that they hadn't participated in governance. And I was kind of reminding them, like, this is the result of not participating in governance. I used to do every month, and then I went to every quarter, and then I ended up not doing it, but I used to do an exchange, not the exchange transfer report, the witness voting report. And it was a way to show how many tokens, how many large account holders are not participating. And I would name them and shame them to a little bit of a degree to say, hey, look, you all should participate in governance. You have tokens and you're not voting right now. You haven't set a proxy, you're not voting. And I remember I used to exclude the Steem at stake, because thankfully after hard fork 17, I think it was, they were like, we're not going to participate anymore, which is great, but we should have pushed that on chain with the operation to disable voting. But it was just, if the token distribution is there, I think DPoS does well. And in the example, I don't think Tim would mind me bringing him up, because he still is a great supporter of Hive and decentralization and everything. I have great respect for Tim. And I'm really actually glad that he disagreed on because he and I both actually disagreed strongly on locking down the transferability of the tokens. It was originally, we're going to, with 22.2, we're going to lock down their ability to participate in governance, because that was the original commitment made. This is 20% stake. This same week, they voted in the Tron Foundation with tokens that weren't supposed to, so they could do it again here. And that was an existential threat. People like yourself and others, stakeholders were like, this is serious, guys. You need to do something. So I felt strongly about that. And then it was a change at the last minute that they included that operation that was a liquid transfer. And there, I think at the time there were 2 million tokens there. We wanted to, and preventing the power down was also contentious, because once you do a power down, you've really only got 7 days until they get a large chunk of tokens, and you can't undo a power down without a massive hard fork. So we're like, that would be a challenge, right? So working through that, it was like, oh, I don't really like that, but it was so important to me to protect the network that I said, okay, we're gonna do 22.2. My intention was to have a call with him scheduled that same moment. I had email back channels going with Justin. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. Like, he didn't respond. His team member didn't respond. It took 7 days before they responded. So it was gonna be temporary, have the conversation, and then we could remove it and go do our separate thing if that was the case, right? But Tim, to his credit, stood his ground on that and said, no, I'm not gonna support that. I'm gonna run 22.3. And he still supported preventing voting. 22.3, if I understand it correctly, prevented them voting, but didn't prevent the liquid transfers. It may have actually prevented the power down as well. I'd have to double check the code, but even that, the community signaled and removed it. And I want to make the distinction between that, with a nice token distribution of community members who are protecting their stake with skin in the game, and what we have now on Steem, which is essentially one person with so much stake because everyone else is disengaged from the process that they can control the entire rankings. And that's where you see a number one person go to 50th. And that's not an example of DPoS working effectively in my mind. It's literally one person making one decision, and all these tokens are on one proxy. And that I think is worth highlighting, because some people will look at Steem and go, what a shit show, what a terrible piece of crap system. When in reality, it's the value created by the token holders that are engaged in the community that creates the security around that system. Whereas we have that in Hive, we've lost that in Steem, and people like yourself have decided this is no longer a blockchain. That's how I look at it. It's not a blockchain. It's a centralized database controlled by one person.
Yeah, it's amazing to see such an attack. In hindsight, I love that this happened, because it exploits every kind of, it's like cracks and water always goes to the cracks. It's like this exploited everything that was exploitable. We had the largest stakeholder was then malicious versus investment. He wants to centralize a decentralized network. And we saw everything. It was like out of a movie. So we really got to learn a lot moving forward with Hive. I know they're going to implement the 30-day wait for when if we had that, we might not even be talking about Hive today. We might still be on Steem. Well, we would be, actually. So it's very interesting what we've learned out of all this. And just a little thing like that wakes you up. And that can be all the difference from longevity. And distribution's always great. 1 token, 30 votes. We can get into philosophy of that. Whether it should be lower, maybe it should be higher. I've actually heard people I respect make an argument for more.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Larimer has talked about approval voting, and back in the day, I can remember conversations he had where, if in Block One just this week announced that they're gonna, they announced they're gonna vote, a long time ago, but now they're actually seriously going to create a foundation entity, which again I've been somewhat involved with the EOS Foundation. So I've got a lot of work to do. Everyone's messaging me this week, the last 2 days, going, "Hey, is this the thing you've been working on?" I'm like, "Well, kind of, but not really." So we're gonna have an interesting conversation with that whole side of things. But they made a point to say, like, they're going to vote, but if they're going to vote, they would probably want 50, for example, votes. Therefore, they could guarantee that 50 great people would always have enough support to be somewhere in the game, right?
Yep.
And that was the idea of approval voting, is that as long as everybody approves the good guys, it's just so difficult for the bad guys to get in. That's the idea of approval voting. Now, when people talk about one token, one vote, or other similar strategies, I'm certainly interested to explore it. I'm certainly interested to give it a shot, but I also think that it could make it very difficult. Whereas you get enough people to vote in those top 21 or even 15, just the 2/3 plus 1, with their massive vote, and it can cause people to only vote for themselves. For example, some massive token holders will vote for themselves and no one else, and they get to be pushed up to the top. And there's just, at that point, it's almost just straight proof of stake. There is no way to get them out unless you just have a lot of money. And now we have basically a plutocracy. Whereas when you have delegated proof of stake with approval voting, you have a lot of different people that can come together, coordinate through potentially a proxy or something others, and represent themselves in a big way. Now, there's other interesting ideas like a board account and quadratic voting. The Boss Network is doing board account. There's a couple ideas of quadratic voting. Some people think that you're just going to quadratically increase the problem. I think Telos did a really interesting thing, but people don't agree with cutting the legs out from investors by limiting their stake, which is kind of what they did by capping their airdrop and stuff to a certain amount. There's also discussions about, even tying in some form of identity where, Voice has talked about some kind of identity system. There's serious privacy concerns with that, of course. So it's really cool to think that all of this is now within the Hive community, something that we really care about. And it's really reminded me again, I've got a lot of projects I'm working on. I'm managing director for FIO, working with EOS Foundation, also with EOS Stack. And Steem and Hive is now something that is super more important to me because I took it for granted. I really did. I was like, Steem will always be there. I'll always be able to post my content on an immutable blockchain. I'll always have censorship resistant, and I never have to worry about that. And it was a reminder that no, that's not the case unless you fight for it.
Yep. And young technologies, we have a lot of growing pains. DPoS is very new. And to touch on the 1 token, 1 vote versus the 1 and 30, I believe something like a 1 to 50, 1 to 30 is, with token distribution, the actual best model there is. With a bad token distribution, I believe 1 token, 1 vote becomes the best model.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
So in times of war, I think you want 1 token, 1 vote. But in times of peace, 1 token, 30 votes, 1 token, 50 votes, it's drastically more efficient. So it'd be interesting maybe to have a hybrid model there, but I don't know how that works. But overall, I still am a fan of 1 token, 30 votes, or even more at that point, especially with the distribution being what it is on Hive. A money attack, as we've seen, all that's going to do is raise token price. You can leapfrog off of that, create another token. The value goes with the community, the money attackers left holding the bags.
Yeah.
So that's the defense on 1 token, 30 vote, or really any DPoS chain. So
are you familiar with the board account? It's kind of interesting where it's like, it's still, you get multiple votes, but each vote you get, as far as I understand it, becomes less influential. So it's essentially you're ranking your own votes, which is kind of a neat way to do it. Therefore, you're further deciding who the good actors in the community are for if you're trying to make if you're a good actor yourself. And it limits your ability to say, all of my sock puppets get to have the same voice. You have to actually rank your sock puppets as well. And therefore your lower ranking sock puppets are obviously going to have less influence than the great actors that are always in the top from the legitimate voters. Very interesting idea.
Yeah, I like that, because you can think that some people you want as really good backup witnesses, right? You have some Rudy witnesses. They may not be the best in the limelight, but you can really count on them and loyal. That's very powerful for me. But maybe you don't want to vote them all the same and then have somebody with a small stake be able to get that person in consensus. And you're like, well, now I don't want to vote that person because it might, it's not the top 20 that I want. So having some sort of board vote, I think, could be efficient if we did it right. The numbers there become very, very important, though.
Yeah, and it's also, my understanding is, and I've had great conversation with EOS Nation and Eves, the guys that are working on that for the Boss Network and for the EOS Network, is that it's, you can't yet do it on chain, which immediately is like a showstopper for a lot of people. They're like, I'm not going to trust some oracle. It could be verifiable with hashes and everything, but it was still kind of like it's a little scary. At the same time, I really have a lot of respect for what Steem Engine has done, and the Steem Monsters team and the Splinterlands guys. Like Agro's talk in Bangkok, I think, was really good for me. Got me thinking differently about the need for smart contracts on chain, because it was the idea that if it's so easy to verify that every participant in that particular ecosystem is following the rules because of the on-chain data that's immutable, then really processing where that processing happens becomes less relevant. And he gave a great presentation that got me thinking, okay, maybe something like a board account or something like that did influence governance, as long as it could be easily verifiable that the calculation is going to be the same for everybody, then it's like, all right, as long as you store the calculation results on chain and it's very easily verifiable, and you could have a system for multiple people verifying it. Kind of interesting. So if you want, I'd actually like to dive in a little bit into philosophy of value. I think one of the things, again, that you bring that's very unique to the conversation is just your commitment as an investor. And not that many investors want to be public, especially in cryptocurrency. A lot of them just stay behind the scenes. So I'd love to have more discussion on that. I did a video probably 2-3 years ago on what is financial value. And I remember, like, I sat there and I was like, I had all these dollar bills from different countries that I collected, and I was like, this is just stupid pieces of paper. Like, these are literally, like, they're as useless in the US right now as pieces of paper, because I can't go anywhere and spend these, right? And my argument on financial value, and I've had some really interesting conversations with some people about this, is that financial value is essentially shared storytelling. It's a group of people that come together and they just collaboratively believe a story. And they start acting as if the story is real. And then they start, building on top of this shared delusion, essentially. And the delusion maybe is a little harsh word, but it's just this idea that it's not real. It's just a thing we all agree to. And every single time someone tries to argue with me about that and say, no, that's all right. There's utility value. There's some fundamental, real value that you could attach it to. I can always come up with a story where that's not the case anymore. And that's where I think that argument falls down. It's like, well, in this situation, money is real. And I say, well, what happens if this happens? Like there's a, tsunami or earthquake, whatever. I can always come up with some scenario where what you thought you valued isn't valuable anymore. And I think how ironic it right now during the COVID lockdown, the world is, worried about this virus. People are starting to reevaluate what they value. Toilet paper and masks and like all of a sudden different things, the story changes. I value my internet connection, my electricity, Zoom and Google Hangouts. And I value these things so much more than I did before. So anyway, I would love your thoughts. What do you think about what is financial value?
Yeah. So a bottle of water at the store is $1. If you're in the desert, you may give 10,000. You may give everything you own for that bottle of water. So that's value to me. What it comes down to, I like what you're saying, short storytelling. I look at it as a game because games have rules, they have structures, and they have incentives. We have a point system. We need to calculate how much value I had, and I need to store it somewhere and prove that I didn't tamper with it. That's really all money is. You go home, you get 1,500 points in your bank account, your account. You did good that day. You passed the test. And we need a way that can't be tampered with. That's what Bitcoin's really good at. It's very good at getting a point in a system. It's really hard to change. It's really dumb money in a way where it means like you're not going to be able to change it. It's simple. At least that's what we hope for. There's no 100%. Anything can happen. I believe if they try to tamper with it, that'd be hard for it. But either way, Bitcoin, I think, is right now one of the closest things that we have is what I guess you can call hard money. Gold as well doesn't rust. So, you have your units of gold. Thousands of years later, they're going to be there. But when we really think about it, it's just points. And then from there, those points get you what you desire, which is vastly different from person to person. Some people like to surf. Some people like wind diving. Some people like relationships. For me, I think relationships are the ultimate form of currency. What happens when you're down and out and you need somebody? Sometimes, money doesn't solve everything. Sometimes you need emotional support. Sometimes you need somebody to have your back in a dangerous situation. There's a lot of things out there. So I think the more relationships you build, as long as you have a point system that's not corruptible, like we see with the dollar is corruptible. They can point as many points in a database as they want. That's unfair to everyone else playing the game. Bitcoin makes it fair, at least. It's like, okay, at least you're not going to inflate my value away. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that money is just a record and it's not real. And it's very, very easy. We've seen in many countries for people to switch the game, flip the game over and say, I don't want to play your game anymore. And now you have, notes that are worth less than what they're actually printed on. That can happen overnight. In Rome, we've seen it. Doesn't matter where you are. And it's guaranteed to happen because there's ups and downs. No empire lasts forever. Every empire gets too big. And when you're big, flaws are fatal and flaws are a given. So it's just a matter of time. So make sure you're invested in censorship-resistant point systems.
I love it. I absolutely agree. And I make that same jump when I go from what is financial value, the shared storytelling, to what is money. It's a record of account. It's a ledger. I've always thought about, and I've read like Origins of Virtue. I've read like all these, the history of money, all these different economics books on like what is money. And I come to that same conclusion, even when it was tally sticks or whether it was, shells or rocks, it was always this mechanism for keeping track of credits and debits, a ledger between the community, members of the community. And I love the different ways that plays into, and I did a video in 2013 about this. It was probably at that time, it's definitely my most, I didn't do many videos, but I had one YouTube video that got people's attention. And it was back in 2013 saying Bitcoin is going to be more disruptive than the internet. And I made the argument about that because I really thought this is the best form of money ever invented. And I went back to, 700 something different versions of fiat currency. Average lifespan is like 27 years or 23 years, whatever it is. Talking about the 7 different world reserve currencies prior, the ones prior to US dollar, how we will not be forever the world reserve currency. We're already starting to see that happen with other nations coming and saying, we're not going to play the petrodollar game anymore. And I got into all of that. And it was really amazing to see even then, 7 years ago, people saying, oh my gosh, yeah, this makes sense. And a lot of them had just never even heard of Bitcoin at that point. And they're sitting there thinking, yeah, this is a rigged game, and then when you tie that into kind of, all wars are bankers' wars, this idea that this monopoly on violence that governments have to not only print money, but to fund their wars. And you mentioned Rome collapsed when they started paying their warriors in bogus tokens, right? They started changing from gold to silver to copper, and then it was kind of like fake, right? And I think eventually the story breaks down. And that's really what it is when the money itself, the record of account, is no longer a good storyteller. And that's what I love about immutable ledgers. It's a really good storyteller because it's very transparent and it's very trustworthy.
And you can look at governments and countries as big communities. They're centralized communities. You might not want to be a part of them, might be forced to be a part of it, which is horrible. And they have their own point systems that they create out of thin air. And it's very powerful to have that, where you're saying, well, I'm the controller of the value and you must work for me and pay me in this value that I'm creating, therefore creating incentive for you to actually use it because you have to, or you end up in prison. It's a very violent, horrible system when you think about it. And cryptocurrencies are starting to do that with communities, but decentralized and voluntary. We have our own value that pooped out of thin air, but we hold it voluntarily, and voluntarily more and more people come. People are escaping decentralized communities and they're joining the ones that are saying, hey, join if you want to. If you don't, there's a million others just like us. And that's really, I see the light punching through the screen. So if we're watching a movie, we're starting to see the lights poke through the screen because these cryptocurrencies are going to be devastating for countries, governments. They're not going to know what they're going to try to stop the ocean with a bucket. And before they know it, nobody's going to want their token because they don't have to. Then they're forced into a situation where it's like, I have to accept Bitcoin for taxes because my currency is no longer valuable. Once that starts happening, the same thing that happens, that value loop where, oh, I'll just pay with Bitcoin. I don't need this fiat currency anymore. The moment you don't need to pay taxes and fiat, it's over. It's done. Game over.
Oh, absolutely. I remember these exact conversations we were having in 2013, talking about how would people attack Bitcoin. And we started talking through like the money attacks and the other things that you've been talking about. And it's just the idea that I think is super interesting is even countries historically, I mean, one of my favorite little meme videos is, China banned Bitcoin, right? And, again and again and again, China banned Bitcoin. But it's also just the idea of countries, not just China, but many of them that have come in and said, oh no, this is bad. Russia, others that have been like, we have to control this. They'll ban it, but then eventually you notice that behind the scenes they're buying it. Behind the scenes, and they do the same thing with gold and different things like that. It's just super interesting that it's like if you were to ban something that becomes the future ledger, the future story that everyone believes, you eventually are like saying, oh, we're not going to like participate in innovation. We're not going to participate in like mining for oil because we don't need energy. It's just an absurd thing to think. Because if it's the future, you have to participate. You don't have the opportunity to not participate. And so, but at the same time, I always try to bring it back to say, I recognize, you probably do as well, that I'm idealistic. I have my perspectives on the world. I did think Steem was going to go to 10 and it went to 7 cents instead, right? Like, it's like I have my perspectives and I'm certainly flawed in them as far as predicting the future. But I do look at some of these and think, man, it sort of seems inevitable to me, right? Just to give it enough time, it seems inevitable. Now, there is the executive order, I think it's 6102 or whatever, a while back in 1933, I think it was, where they outlawed gold. And you were not allowed to actually own, significant amount of physical gold. And they would literally put you in a cage if you tried to own gold. And there are arguments that, no matter how secure your encryption systems are, somebody comes with a rubber hose attack or a wrench attack and knocks you over the head, eventually you're going to give up your password most likely. And so there's an argument there that not just defending the encrypted systems with nice governance, we also have to think about how do we prevent, shutting down the internet, for example, to shut down cryptocurrencies? How do we prevent them, making it illegal, coming to our houses and threatening our wives and children, because we participate in these, environments, because we're on videos like this. Thankfully things like ThreeSpeak exist. I wanted you to chat a little bit about what you're involved in, some of the projects there. Is now ThreeSpeak on Hive completely, or in the process of transitioning, or give us maybe an update on that? Like, why does censorship resistance matter so much?
Yeah, I'm credit to the developers. Hive was literally there the next day. It was 100% on Hive. We removed Steem, and the reason we removed Steem is it being pretty much a centralized database. As we're the home of free speech. There's really no point. It's just redundant. It's more fees. It's 2 blockchains to take care of. We might add Steem tipping down the road because we don't want to censor value transfer. If somebody wants Steem, that's fine. But we're not going to put any kind of backbone in our technology where you can censor. And that's what Hive's all about. And that's what I've always been about. I live a humble lifestyle. I say I could retire right now if I use my money modestly. But I don't want to retire to a world where free speech is being censored. And I wake up panicky sometimes because I realize we can wake up one day and this could be hell. And people, you always take for granted what you think you're going to have forever until it's taken. Then you would give everything you can to take it back. And then people turn to fighters. And then people are willing to jump off the ship when the ship's on fire, risk the sharks in the water. If everyone was willing to risk the sharks, AKA handcuff me, take us all to prison, we're going to own gold, we're going to own Bitcoin, we would win. But it's also the first 20, 30 to go. Nobody wants to be those people. So it's a paradox. We're invincible, but it's very hard to convince people who might be on the front lines of that. So free speech, I believe, is very important because we live in a media world. We live in an information world. If you spin the narrative, you can hate people who you shouldn't be hating. You might want to kill somebody who you shouldn't want to kill at all. Those people are very good people. There's nothing wrong with it, but the media can brainwash you. And we've seen time and time again. And this was at a time where it's amazing what's happened with the internet, because now we have all the information. Before you got fed what information you had no other source. You read a newspaper, that's all you got. Now they're muddying the water, so to speak. It's like, oh, okay, so you have all the information. We're going to throw every information bit at you, and you're not going to know what's real from fake. And that's where we are now. And that's might even be more dangerous, because at least if you were in a propaganda world, a lot of people knew it was propaganda. It's like, this is bullshit. But now you might believe something that you think's not propaganda, and you're led down many trails and breadcrumbs, and you have no idea what's what. And it takes a tremendous amount of research and going down the rabbit holes and communicating with like-minded people to actually come up with what we believe is the truth or what should be. And no one actually knows. But that's where freedom of speech is very, very important, because with muddy waters, if you start taking off the clean taps, the clean water coming in, it's just going to get muddier and muddier and muddier and worse and worse and worse. And every inch they take is a mile on the back end. So I didn't want to just sit back. I said, well, if I can help by 0.0000 infinite 0.01%, then I'm going to play that hand, because why not? I don't want regret. That's the worst thing. If I try my hardest and the world goes to shit, well, I tried. But if I sat back with the resources I have and the connections I have, even if I didn't have those, I would feel like an asshole, in my opinion. It's like, I feel obligated to. So
I super appreciate your perspective. I wish that more people who had resources at their disposal viewed things the way you do, because it's just super important. And I love too, just the idea for the potential we have to make a world we all want to live in, to make something better. It's just really exciting. And it goes back to just what you said earlier, the real value is relationships. And actually one of my favorite posts I've ever done on Steem, I think it made like $1,000 actually. I think it was my highest payout post as well. And it was the true value of Steem, the true currency of Steem is not Steem blockchain dollars, or Steem power, it's relationships. And I had this whole article about how it took me a little while to figure it out, but once I figured it out, I was like, this is what really matters on Steem, is these relationships. And those relationships are on Hive. That's where the real value is. The real community value is still there. And I do think historically, Hive will be recognized as, Steem that changed its name in hard fork 23. Originally I was kind of concerned from a technical level that it had the same chain ID and things like that. And I remember talking to Dan at Block Trades about this. He's like, well, we'll change it later. It's not a big deal. It's another hard fork to change, but we could do it. And now I'm kind of like, I almost don't want to change that chain ID. I'm almost like, this is what I signed up for. This community, this integrity of the game theory dynamics that secure the chain with those who want to invest in and participate in it are still there, and they're part of this system. And as you said, we were able to protect it in a really amazing way, and it caught the attention of some really incredible people. And so it's just, and it's amazing to me that it continues to be the story. I mean, even it's like the more and more we demonstrate how we as a community can defend ourselves, the more it seems, the more desperate people that disagree with us become. Whether they're slamming the token price down, or whether they're actually censoring accounts on chain directly. So my LukeStokes.mhth, my witness account, is now censored. And now there are certain posts I've done about Hive. Like I did a post letting my community know I've got, I don't know, more than 10,000, I think it's like 13,000 users. I said, hey, I'm over at Hive now. You can't see that post because they actually took the HiveMind API, which nobody in the community is bothering to run anymore, because why would you? And they're censoring on the API level. And then they went from there to actually censoring on the actual blockchain level. So there are 8 accounts, including Roland P and other witnesses and community members, that can't even access their tokens at this point. And it's gotten so ridiculous. I think you and others have mentioned it may get to the point of actual legal action, which I'm not personally a fan of. I don't like to involve the violent government people in costumes, but at the same time, when you're in a war, you're in a battle, you got to do what you got to do. And there are some evils that are lesser than others. And I think people getting taken advantage of, thinking that Steem is a legitimate blockchain project at this point, when it's really, as you said, a centralized database, I think causes more harm than good either. So I think those responsible for this, they do have to be held accountable in some way or form. And maybe that's through economic pressure. I don't know. But I do know that there are people that are fighting, and they're fighting with their resources to pump tokens and dump tokens and all this. It's going to be very interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, I think social pressure is what ultimately wins out at the end. You can only have so many tomatoes thrown at you before you give up. And the world's watching, and I think there might be a little lull in the storm, but I think it's going to come back really, really hard, and they're going to understand how really hard it is to hold that freeze. Kudos to them if they can do it for long. I don't think they're going to be able to. We saw Justin and many of the exchanges fold really quick when they, misstepped. And it just goes to show, because I was really fighting for Steem, right? And you're one of the ones that has really understood the meaning of the blockchain. And now I took a step back and I was saying, as a poker player, what's the best move here? This man's pumping money and centralizing the chain. We have the entire community around us. We can leapfrog, right? Use his attack against him like judo, to where he's buying our bags, funding our new project, the community moves, and we double our value, right? Because Steem and Hive still, even at this price, are worth more than Steem's been in the last year or so. So as an investor, I'm really thrilled at what happened. And now, it's just really amazing, because I don't believe in, if I take a step back, I'm talking pure investor, no emotion at all. I'm looking at him, I was like, okay, well, he has a centralized chain. He owns however many tokens, let him pump my bags. Why not, right? I want to get the most money out of this as possible. Now you go to a moral reason, and, he's not beating a bag of puppies. I don't believe in the way he does things. He wants a centralized thing. He really took it by force. He tried to impose his will on a community that's decentralized. That's fine. I don't get mad at bears when they attack me. I just wear better armor, put myself in a better situation. Nice. And that's how I felt with him. So I look at him like a tiger, right? Respect, but also ready to defend myself at any time. Now it's not really it doesn't matter. We've already judoed, and I think we've done it. I'm also a little bit serendipity. I think you can have a good sign from things, and we got a luck. We got that lucky winning. When Hive first announced, all that happened. I call that winner's luck. And we got winner's luck right from the get-go. And that really gives me goosebumps, because it's hard to get. You can have all the money in the world and launch something, and it's a dud. And you can have no money at all, and the whole world gets behind you, and you get things that you couldn't buy. You can't buy a Vitalik tweet. You can't buy these things. So we got some of that winner's luck behind us, which is a good sign.
I'd love that analogy. And I felt the same way when I woke up in the morning, and, I've got my notifications on my phone set. So it's like, when all of my nodes go down at the same time, and they're all notifying me, my seed node's down, my backup node down, and they're all down. Like the chain just got attacked. Something just, so I jump out of bed, I get to my computer, I'm checking things, and I quickly find out what's going on. And I was just like, holy moly. And I have to tell the world, we literally just been attacked. And it was one of the most amazing things that, to see the world respond, like, wow, this is a big deal. And I remember even February 14th, when he announced he was going to buy it, February 15th, I tweeted, everyone in the space needs to watch this very, very closely. DPoS is about to be tested. And I remember starting that narrative early on, and I think that kind of set the table for other people. Once this happened, it was kind of like a little bit of an I told you so, right? It was a little bit like, I told you this was going to be significant. I saw this was coming. And it's been really neat to see people that otherwise wouldn't give any care at all whatsoever to Steem. Like, I've literally had conversations with influential people in the space that are like, Steem, I thought that was dead a long time ago. And that's still around. They had no idea, nor did they care. All of a sudden they're like, oh wow, there's a lot of cool apps. There's a lot of cool community. Wow, here's a group of people that aren't just in it just for the money. Now there are investors like yourself who say, no, this is a good bet. This is a good play because the world needs the services that this is offering, and you need to have Steem tokens in order to have resource credits to participate. It's a good bet. There's some value there. It's a great story. It's a good ledger, all these beautiful things. But it's also there's just everyday people. There's just everyday people, relationships, the real currency. They're showing up and saying, my mom's here, my grandma's here, my brother, my sister, my friends. We play card games, Steam Monsters, or we get and do different apps that get built on it, whether it's TheySpeak or whatever. And I think as more and more of those apps, and I've loved following you and others talk about this, more than 50% of apps are already moving over. As more and more of them shut down their Steem and move to Hive, because they, just like you said with TheySpeak and your team, because they want to support an actual blockchain. They don't want to mislead people to think that they're on a decentralized, immutable ledger when they're just not on the Steem ecosystem. So super exciting to see. I know you got other stuff going on. We're coming up near to an hour, but Dan, I wanted to thank you so much. Any other stuff, any other topics you want to cover? I think we got the value of money, which was super great. We talked about just kind of briefly the story of Hive and Steem and how we got here, why you as an investor participated, which again, I'm so appreciative of. Any other topics you want to cover?
Well, I can just highlight the fact that I really like the term layer zero. I think it might have been Andreas that coined that. Forgive me if it was somebody else. It really shows deposits are not, right? This is technology with a community behind it. You can say the Bitcoin community, you can say the Ethereum community, but what this showed was remove the technology for a second. We're becoming mini countries. We're becoming digital countries without boundaries, and we're very powerful. And when a bully picks on you, the world doesn't like that. And the bully usually isn't a liked person, right? Going into it. So people who are strangers or neutral become your friends by a common enemy. And it's very amazing how because people want to say, oh, I have a token, but there's so much more than that. There's social dynamics, there's communities, there's so much serendipity, Pandora's box. You don't know where your wind's going to come from. It's 4th and inches. It's raining. Your nose is bloody. You don't know how you're going to get in there. A hole pops up because somebody did something. That's what happens with this. So it's like a living organism. It's really amazing to be a part of. And I really urge people who haven't been a part of a blockchain community to do so, because you're going to find yourself with a higher grade of communication, a higher grade of bonding. And it's very powerful.
Yeah, well said, Dan. Thank you so much again for your time. And I look forward to having conversations in the future as this continues. And it's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Yep. Let's do it again soon. Cheers.
All right. Take care.